Welcome back. I've been getting a lot of messages asking me to do a shootout of Bill Evans's A Sunday at the Village Vanguard because it was included in the recent Original Jazz Classics series by Craft Recordings. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to finally tackle this. One of the reasons why I think people have been excited about this is because, well, not only is it an iconic album, but I actually did do a shootout comparison with the previous reissue of Waltz for Debby that came out, I don't know when it was, like mid-year, maybe June, May, something like that. So, and actually I'll link that video so that after you watch this one, if you want to go back and hear my thoughts on how Waltz for Debby compared to the original pressing as well as the Analogue Productions, you can go do that. But what we're going to do today is talk about this OJC and how it compares to the original as well as the Analogue Productions 45 RPM. I'm going to try to dig into how it sounds in comparison, which one's best, that kind of stuff. So two things before we get started. One of them you're going to be really excited about. Firstly, like this, subscribe to this, and what else? So follow me on Instagram at what_can_brown. That's not what you're going to be most excited about. I'm going to do a giveaway. So not in this video, right? Not in this video. I'm going to do a separate video where I'm going to announce this contest, and it's going to have the rules and like how to enter and that kind of stuff. But what I'm going to give away is a copy of Thelonious Monk's Brilliant Corners. This is the Craft Recordings small batch series for this year. Actually, one of two for this year. But this is the more recent one. My copy's number 416, so it's pretty low. And you know what? Like, here's the thing. I'm not giving this away because I don't like it. I actually have another copy. Somehow managed to get two of these things. And so having an extra copy, I thought I might as well get rid of it, and it'd be fun to do it as a giveaway. So it'll be an easy thing to enter. Like, all you'll have to do is subscribe and like. so very low effort, but again, not in this video, but in a video coming up very soon, because I'd like to have this given away and shipped and have it arrive to the person who gets it prior to the upcoming Christmas holiday. All right, so Sunday at the Village Vanguard. Here it is, or here they are, right? So I've got an original mono here. I've got the Original Jazz Classics stereo. Then I also have this Analogue Productions 45 RPM stereo edition from the box set. Box set is right here. So that's what I'm going to be, here. I'm going to focus mostly on the Original Jazz Classics, to be honest, because I want to tell you my thoughts around it, what I think about the release, and it just so happens that I have these other ones to compare it to, which always gives me a little bit more to say, so that people can decide whether the OJC, Original Jazz Classics edition, is worth it. So I always like to talk about history, so let's talk a little bit about that. What is this album? Well, it is a live album recorded on June 25th, 1961 at the Village Vanguard venue in New York City. So on that particular day, the Bill Evans Trio played a total of 5 sets of music, 2 in the afternoon and 3 in the evening. Each of them were about a half hour. That's a lot of music. Well, it's 2.5 hours of music in aggregate for that individual day. I can't even imagine being on stage and performing for that long. So what they did with that content is they first released it as Sunday at the Village Vanguard. They took a selection of tracks, released it as Sunday at the Village Vanguard. Then what they did the following year is they took a new selection of tracks, released that music as Waltz for Debby. So even though Waltz for Debby is not called Sunday at the Village Vanguard Volume 2, very much is exactly that. So this session is really iconic for a number of reasons. The first is naturally the music. So the content in this session, I would say, is arguably Bill Evans's best work, and what he is perhaps most associated with or most remembered, more so than say, other albums. Now, while Waltz for Debby, the other album, so made from content at this live session, may actually be a better selection of music, that's my opinion, Sunday at the Village Vanguard is certainly amazing on its own. I think that the track Gloria's Step, which opens the album, is probably my favorite individual track across both albums. So even though I like Waltz for Debby overall better, really like that track. So the next reason why this is iconic is that it's live. And so therefore it's a live recording. It is quite a feat, not that I've experienced doing this, but it seems like it is quite a feat to have music this beautiful and quiet and nuanced be captured in a live setting, but they managed to do it. So you can periodically hear light chatter of people at the venue because it was not like closed off. It's not like they just happened to use the stage. There's an audience there for each of these sessions. So you can hear light chatter, you can hear the sound of glasses like clinking and plates, and certainly the audience's response to the music as well, which I think in retrospect is a little shocking, right? Because it is nice to hear the clapping and everything, but it's so crazy to hear how much people were talking during the performance. I think it adds to the mood of this thing, the ambiance and everything, and it is one of the reasons why this music is so iconic is because it really feels like, especially in a well-done version, it feels like you're there because you're getting all that kind of background stuff. So that's the second reason why this is iconic. And the third reason it's iconic is because the bassist, Scott LaFaro, was killed in a car accident just 11 days after the recording. Because of his death, Riverside, the label who put this out originally, rushed the release of it. So I mentioned it was recorded in June. Well, it was released in September. That is insane. That is an insane turnaround. And because of this, they actually reference, it's hard to see in this one because I still have the Obi on it, but let me pull up the original. Because this happened, they decided to reference featuring Scott LaFaro as a little bit of a tribute on the cover. In addition to that, the takes that they chose, the takes of the tracks that they chose for the album were in part guided by the effort to include more of Scott LaFaro than perhaps they otherwise would have. So in effect, what we have is a lot of extended bass solos here with typically just drums. Like sometimes Bill Evans will do some comping, little light comping, but a lot of it is like stark bass solos with drums. And so I think one of the reasons why this is such an appreciated album and it's so quiet and intimate feeling is because of those bass solos, and they're stark and beautiful, and they just feel so tragic, right? Because of the loss of such an immense talent. So all of these reasons packaged together is why people care quite a bit about this album. While I have these covers up, let's take just a quick look, and I'll try to give you some close-ups if that helps. So in terms of these covers, just a couple of quick things. One is that the Analogue Productions cover is glossy, and I mentioned this in my Waltz for Debby comparison as well. So this is a glossy cover. The jacket is, I would say, fine. I mean, I suppose it's adequate. It's not a gatefold, so you do have two discs that are just kind of jammed in there together. I would say if this was going to be released today in like a brand new format, they probably would have gone gatefold just to protect those discs and to help justify the cost. So something that you'll notice is that there's a significant color difference between these three. I would say that the Analogue Productions is high contrast and probably the least pleasant looking out of the three, whereas there was an effort by OJC to kind of capture a similar, the similar tone of this cover. And note that, yes, this is stark white. Mine would be stark white, right, if this original copy was actually brand new, but instead it's got some soiling on it. So what I wanted to do, this is important actually, or I think this is going to be something that people are going to get excited about, not the taking shrink off, but what I'm going to show you here in just a second. There's no hype sticker, so I don't have to worry about the shrink. So, Obi. So what they did, and that I think is super cool, because Riverside did not do this with every cover. There is a very nice texture to the original cover, and guess what? They mimicked it on the original Jazz Classics edition. So if you look carefully at these two editions, I'm talking the exact same texture. It's not like an approximation. They used the exact same texture. It is like so similar. You look like close up and you can kind of see it. And again, I'll show you a cutaway of this, but it just looks really good. You'll notice the stereo banner at top, whereas the mono has the banner at the bottom. That's also correct. If this original was a stereo edition, the banner would be right up top and look something like that. I say something like it because what Kraft does is that they put in their own catalog numbers instead of reusing the Riverside, the original Riverside. On the back, let's see if there's anything, I guess, worth noting other than, again, that the the catalog number difference, right? And there's going to be some additional stuff at the bottom of these things, but otherwise they seem to have done a great job reproducing everything. I think that the image quality on this is just, gosh, it's like outstanding. It's like the exact same. It really is. So anyway, I know a lot of people care about covers and reproducing some of these original details. And what I can say from looking at this thing outside of Shrink for the first time right here with you is that this is just phenomenal. This is a great example of honoring the original item and giving people, giving modern audiences as close as, something to the original as they can. All right, so let's dig into the music. How am I going to go about this? Well, I'm going to cover just 2 tracks, because if we covered 6, we'd be here all day. The 2 that I'm going to choose, though, are for a particular reason. So the first one that I wanted to cover is Glorious Step. So it's the first track on side 1, and the reason is because, as I mentioned earlier, it's my favorite one in the entire session, probably. So I definitely wanted to highlight that one. It's a 6-minute one. It was written by Scott LaFaro as well. Nice to get one of his compositions in here, given the circumstance. So the second one that I wanted to highlight, though, is Alice in Wonderland. This is the first track on side 2, and the reason why I chose this one is because there is a lot of audience noise on this thing, and I wanted to basically take a close look at how each of these editions treat the audio noise and see if there's any additional commentary that can come out of that. So those are the 2 that we're going to focus on, and I think are good representatives of my conclusion of which one I think is best out of these 3. So let's start with this original mono pressing. So what I would say up front is that there is not really a noise floor on this thing. And I think that that's interesting because Riverside records often have a noise floor. And what I mean by noise floor, right, is that, if there's no music happening, what's the sound that you hear? It's a little bit difficult in this because you have audience noise. But even up front, like when you just set the needle down, do you hear anything? Is there any kind of like light static, anything like that? There really isn't any noise floor here per se. Otherwise, what I would say about how the instruments are treated, the drums are certainly less pronounced. And remember, a lot of my comments are going to be in comparison with other versions I've heard, right? Like these other versions coming up. So drums are certainly less pronounced than I would like on this thing. And I think that they lack detail. And so tangibly, what I mean, what happens in this recording is that I feel like Paul Motion sticks to the brushes pretty consistently throughout this recording. And the reason why is because it's a trio, and he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to overpower the bass. He doesn't want to overpower the piano. And so he does a lot of brush work on this thing. And I've mentioned this in prior videos. When you're on brushes and there's not really great sonic detail present in the recording, brushes tend to sound like sandpaper, like like that. Or in this case, because they're extended, it's like this just like across the song. And that's not really a great way to present drum work. So I do find fault in this original mono because of the drums. Now, the bass solo, on the other hand, and really the bass work throughout this track sounds excellent. So LaFaro does obviously he does a great job, but there is some sonic detail to the bass. You can hear detail around the attacks, some string noise, that kind of thing. I would say that there's not as much resonance to the bass, so you don't really get to hear the sustains as much as in some of the other recordings, and so that's not quite as good as well. Bill Evans really does sound fantastic. He sounds well balanced on this mono. I don't think that there's anything that I would necessarily say that it's missing if the only version that I had heard was this one, but it still doesn't mean that this is the best version in order to hear Bill Evans's piano playing. So let's talk about the OJC. Every time I pick this up, I'm like fascinated by the texture on the cover. All right, so this is the OJC stereo edition, And what I would say as my opening comment before about noise floor, this is certainly quieter overall. Like I'm talking like you can drop the needle and not even realize that any of your equipment is on in your room because you don't hear a thing. So really, really quiet. The stereo format adds a three-dimensional quality to the music that is really, really nice. And I guess how that materializes is that because you basically have Bill Evans in the right channel, you have Scott LaFaro in the left, and you have Paul Motion, who is either center or slightly left, but there is a little bit of his drums that are picked up in the right channel because it's a small venue and you're always going to have that bleed, right? But the bleed here works really, really well, I think, because it adds that three-dimensional quality to the music. So what I can say is I do enjoy hearing this album in stereo, even though I think that there's some mono purists out there that believe that the only way to hear Bill Evans is in mono. All right, so I mentioned, what did I mention? Okay, so I mentioned the kit. So there are more dynamics to Bill Evans's piano than what I heard in the original. I would say that you're always going to hear him, and yes, he plays soft, and yes, he plays loud sometimes, but there feels like there's a little bit more dynamics even to just his attacks and his sustains and exactly where it cuts off, where he sort of releases the keys and that kind of thing. There's more detail around his piano, and so even though I think he sounds great in mono, I think he sounds better in this stereo edition than he does in the original pressing. So now let's talk about that bass, because the bass sounds just phenomenal here. I don't think that I've heard it sound any better in any other format. So there's more detail. You hear the resonance of the bass or the sustains of the bass, but you also hear the cutoffs. And given that the bassist Scott LaFaro is highlighted so much on this album, the fact that he sounds the best in this edition basically wins the day just from the outset, right? Like he just sounds really, really good. I think it's the best that I've ever heard him. And yeah. Did I say enough about Paul Motion? I mentioned the stereo separation, but I also think that his drums have a lot more detail. There's a lot more crispness around it. I think that his cymbals don't have that problem of being almost like, two-dimensional or whatever that I mentioned on the in the original pressing. There's a lot more detail, and it doesn't just sound like sandpaper. You're getting a lot more of the swishing, and there's more sort of interesting information, sonic information around his drum work. All right, so let's see if that Analogue Productions title can make up any ground, given that the OJC did such a great job. And just as a point of reference, when I did this same shootout for Waltz for Debby, the Analogue Productions copy won. It was better than either the original or the original Jazz Classics. So what do I think about this one? Well, what I would say is that the bass resonates even more than on either of the other two editions. But I want to be clear, it resonates, but it's so like boomy and ever present in the mix that it feels like across this entire track, there's almost like no moment of quiet. And it's not great. It's not a great way to be when you consider that this is a live piano trio that should be about noise. Should be about space and quiet and nuance. Obviously, in addition to the playing, and because the bass is so boomy on this in this presentation, I feel like it distracts a little bit from how this should sound. It sounds a little bit unnatural. I also would say that in terms of the drum work, there is some crispness that is lost from the drums, and I think it's because the track is so bassy. Piano sounds great, as it often does, and I don't think that there's necessarily any difference here between Bill Evans' playing in this edition compared to the original Jazz Classics. I just think that the bass sounds overall better than the OJC, and that is the biggest takeaway from this thing. The OJC sounds more natural, as in more realistic, of what you'd expect a live performance to sound like. And I think as a result of how boomy this is, this Analogue Productions edition sounds a little bit more produced in a way, because it's bassier, because everything seems to resonate more, and there really isn't an ounce of space in the recording. Now, I know that this was sourced from the original master tapes, so when I say the word produced, I don't mean like somebody tweaking the levels in like a digital recording. It just comes across that way. It just comes across as a little bit more of a modern recording and not necessarily in a good way. All right, so let's move on to that second track. We know that the OJC title or the OJC release is in the leader spot at the moment. Let's see if that changes. So Alice in Wonderland opens side 2 of this thing. And again, the reason why I chose it is because of audience noise. And you'll hear the audience just from the get-go. There's like this opening kind of murmur, low clinking of glasses immediately and throughout, especially the intro, but really the entire track. Just Bill Evans actually opens this track without any other instruments, so it's a little bit more obvious that that audience is there. Once it picks up tempo, so bass and drums enter and then it kind of picks up tempo, the audience is probably the loudest of any section of the entire album, like full on talking that you can hear. And it's a little bit weird, but how I describe it is, I don't know if I'm sure everybody's had this experience. You're in a restaurant, one table starts talking a little bit louder, everyone else brings up the volume as well, and pretty soon the whole room is like just way too much noise. So I think what happened was that Bill Evans started off playing very, very softly, and people were mid-conversation, and as soon as it picked up tempo and the other instruments were added in, people needed to start talking a little bit louder in the room, and so then everybody brought up the talk level. That's what it sounds like to me anyway. And I actually think that there's slight evidence of the engineer turning up like the microphones, so that because the volume of all the instruments comes up just enough audibly, so that presumably so that they can kind of drown out a little bit of that audience noise in this recording. So that was interesting to hear that, and I did hear that, by the way, on the mono first. That was the first time I heard it, and then I validated that I could also hear a little bit of that in the other editions as well. I would say that the drums, so this is going to be similar sounding to some of my comments from that first track. The drums and the bass, even though they're louder, even though the engineer probably turned it up a little bit, they're still not really detailed. The drums still sound like that kind of sandpapery kind of sound, rather than anything close to being like a nuanced sort of, drummer that has like different almost dynamics with the brushes. You just don't hear that. The extended bass solo here has a lot of chatter that even interrupts the music. So I don't mean the solo has the chatter, it's the chatter is in the background and interrupts that solo, and it's distracting. It really is. I was surprised taking a close listen to this album after, I probably haven't heard it in a few months, right? But taking a close listen and trying to listen to audience noise, I inevitably heard it, and it was quite distracting. All right, so Craft, OJC, right? So the audience chatter at the front is, funnily enough, it is more prominent. And yet, the thing is that because you can actually hear more detail in this OJC pressing, you can actually make out some of the specific words that the audience members are saying, which is weird. But it's like, in a way, because it's more distinct with that additional sonic detail, it seems less offensive. So in the mono, because you don't have that sonic detail, this murmur just kind of like floats over the entire record, and here it just seems more distinct when people are talking. It sounds more natural as a result, and even though it's quite prominent, it just feels less distracting. I think in this edition, the music also does a better job overall of covering the audience noise as a result. Possibly because there's more, possibly because of that stereo separation, right? So there's more to pay attention to between left and right channel that may take your sort of ear away from focusing on some of the audience noise. Audience is still there. They didn't hide it. They didn't try to reduce it, I don't think, from this edition. And yet it just seems not as obvious. The drums here, I think, shimmer much more than on that original pressing. There's much more detail and dynamics than on the original. In fact, those cymbals really just shimmer across the entire recording at times, and I think it sounds really, really nice. Just excellent detail without that detail being distracting or unnatural sounding. The bass is more prominent on this edition, and it's more detailed. I would say that the bass solo here doesn't seem to have the same degree of audience noise that kind of hangs over it. And you can hear this really subtle Bill Evans accompaniment during the bass solo that I didn't even notice on the first pressing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure if I went back and I looked for it or listened for it, I'd hear it. But the first time it even occurred to me that it was there was when I was listening to this edition, and I think it's because of some of that detail. So again, you can hear the chatter throughout and even make out what they're saying, as I said. And I think in some ways it adds to that whole live experience, which is part of the point of this album in the first place. I still can't understand how people at that time were talking so much in a performance, especially of the Bill Evans Trio, though. All right, so this is it. This is the last opportunity, right, for the Analogue Productions to redeem itself. So my feedback on this track for the AP edition is that the bass, have to start with the bass, is more pronounced than either of the other two. Like I said with the previous track, I can tell that immediately it's more pronounced. It's fatter, but it's less detailed. So there's more of it, right? There's more bass, like volume. It's just like, you can hear it, but there's not as much detail around it. Certainly compared to either the mono original or the OJC. I will say that the piano sounds more dynamic on this track. Like the frequency needle on my Mac gear is just like popping up and down the whole time. And I tried to adjust the levels so that I was hearing these at a similar volume. And yet the piano just on this track just seems maybe the most dynamic compared to the other editions. The drums on this track I don't think are as detailed, and they don't seem as brought forward, or they're just not as present in the mix as I heard it on the OJC. I would probably say that the bass solo sounds equally good. So when the bass is on its own, for some reason, it doesn't sound as boomy, because I think that there's more notes that are being plucked. So I think the bass solo does sound really good here. What I would say, if I'm going to characterize this now, even just thinking about these two tracks, there may be some more sonic elements here that are going to grab your attention. Okay, so it may be punchier in some places. There's going to be more of that bass noise in the, that's present in the mix. And so I think if that's what you want, if you want some of these like flashier things, then you'll find them here. You'll find them in this edition. But the big thing here is that I feel like the OJC edition is more listenable and probably more representative of what a balanced live session would have sounded like if you were there. And for that reason, I'm going to have to, and despite some of the strengths of this AP edition, I'm going to have to give the crown or the trophy or whatever to this latest original Jazz Classics edition. I think that I think it's phenomenal all around. I know I just talked about two tracks, but the whole thing sounds outstanding. Obviously, the cover is superior for folks who care about that. And I think I'm really excited, not only that Kraft decided to make this available and include it in the series, but they're doing these editions at such a relatively affordable price point. All right, so you've heard my thoughts. The OJC wins. I really enjoy doing this kind of stuff, especially with such fun, exciting, iconic titles as Sunday at the Village Vanguard. I absolutely love that album. I love the venue. I love the ability to connect to the fact that I listen to the album and think about Bill Evans playing in that venue that I've been to and I've seen shows at, and it's just it's a lot of fun. So hopefully this was helpful for any folks out there who are wondering how this thing sounds. Apologize that I don't have an OJC edition from like what like the 80s or 90s to compare this to. But I will say that in past reviews, I did take a look at the Waltz for Debby OJC from like 5 or something that George Horn mastered. And there were problems with that recording. It did not sound good. So I can't say necessarily that Sunday at the Village Vanguard is the same with that previous OJC edition. But what I can tell you is that this modern OJC edition sounds better than the original mono, sounds better than the Analogue Productions 45 RPM. So that's my personal sort of subjective takeaway. Would love to hear what others think about this edition in the comments, or any other edition that you think is the best one that you've heard, because I'm always interested to hear this music in the best possible way it can be heard. So that's one takeaway, and the other is, again, remember to subscribe and like. Again, the contest is not in this video, but in in an upcoming video, I am going to be giving this away. I'll even pay for shipping. Be giving this fantastic title away. So keep an eye out for that in an upcoming video, and I'll see you next time.